Okay, so I decided to make a video in order to support your learning from yesterday. We had learned how to solve some quadratic functions, and solving, don't forget, means to find x. Okay, when we're finding x, that means that we're actually finding the x-intercepts, okay? And that's the spot where the graph or the parabola hits the x-axis. So that's an x-intercept there, and that's an x-intercept, right there. There are always two of them. Well, not always, but right now we're gonna just kind of work with there's two of them. It's not always the case, but like I said, there are exceptions. So we have to find x, which means finding the x-intercepts. But now that we've learned how to factor, they're not going to say factor because factoring does not give you the x-intercepts. Yes, it's one of the steps to finding the x-intercepts, but it's not the only step to finding the x-intercepts. So the new instruction is to solve for x. And when you see that, you need to make sure that you're going to find x and that your answer at the end is x1 equals and x2 equals. It's very, very important that you do your work in the proper way and you have a concluding statement that is going to answer the question. And in this case, it's solving for x, which means you have to have x equal something. So the first example, notice how the equation is equal to 0. That's because when you're finding x-intercepts, I'll just show you over here. Here's the y-axis, here's the x-axis. Anytime you're finding the x-intercept, the value of y is 0. Okay, so you have a value for x, but the value of y is 0. The next intercept also has an x value, but will also have a y value of 0. You can't mix those two together. Okay, I see this mistake happen quite a bit. Do not do that. That's not right because this is the x position and this is the y position. So for you to put two x's side by side, first off, doesn't make any sense. So I need to make sure that you write it in this form right here. Okay. So first example is solve for x, and it gives us an equation equal to 0, which is why we need to find the x-intercepts. And in this case here, we can't do inverse operations, so you do have to factor. Okay? And when we see this, I notice that it's a trinomial, that there are no common factors, which means I'm going to use AC times B. My AC in this case is 1 times 14, and my B is equal to 9. So I need to find factors of 14. So 1 times 14, 2 times 7, 3 times nothing, 4, 5, 6, back to 7. These are my only two options. And when I look at this, I can see right away that 2 plus 7 does equal 9. And 2 times 7 does equal 14. So this works. We've done this before, so I'm kind of doing this a bit quickly. My two numbers are 2 and 7. I have to decide at this point if I'm going to do decomposition or not. So I take a look at my A value, and I know that A equals 1, which means I do not need to do decomposition. I'm going to open up two brackets. I don't know if I left enough room here. And in the first bracket, I'm going to put x plus 2, because my first number is positive 2. And in my second bracket, I'm going to put x plus 7, because my other number is positive 7. Now, the only thing that you need to make sure that you put over here, and I may not have talked to you about since I wasn't really in class with you, I want to make sure that you put equals 0. Okay? So make sure that you just have the equals 0 at the end. We're not done yet. All you did was factored. You need to make sure that you solve for x. The one part I circled up here, very, very, very important. So to do that, you take x plus 2, you make it equal to 0. You also take x plus 7 and make it equal to 0. Now to continue solving, that means you need to find x. So I need you to make sure you cancel out that positive 2 by subtracting 2 on each side. So here's x1. x1 equals negative 2. To cancel out the plus 7, I'm going to do minus 7 on each side, and this means that x equals negative 7. Now, these are the answers. x2 is negative 7, x1 is negative 2. If you put this on a graph, you have negative 2 approximately over here, and negative 7 over here. If I'm going to do a sketch, I know this parabola opens up because my A value is positive 1. So if I'm just going to do a quick sketch, it would look something like this. Okay? This is just to show you visually what it looks like, and I'm not going to keep that here. My concluding sentence or statement needs to be the zeros, or the x-intercepts, are, and I want it in coordinate form. So if you haven't done this yesterday, it's okay, but all the work that you do today, I'd like to see it in this form. Okay? Now, moving on to a different example, and this is one that I think most people struggled with. There's no common factor, and it's not a trinomial, but that doesn't mean that you can't factor it. In this case here, there's a common factor. I'm going to let you look at this for a second. Between 2 and 5, there's no common factor for 2 and 5. It would be 1, and taking out a 1 is redundant. It just kind of repeats itself. But there is an x that's a common factor. I can only take 1 out because there's only 1 over here. So I'm going to put the x in the front. And I'm going to say what's left. So x times 2x gives me 2x squared. And then x times 5 gives me 5x. Don't forget to put the equals 0 at the end. Now this looks funny because it's not something that you've seen before. You're so used to seeing 2 brackets, like just in this situation right here. But this one does not have 2 brackets. So let's make it 2 brackets. This is saying that it's x plus 0. It's x plus nothing. That's why it's not there. So if you're more comfortable with this, then you might as well just write it this way. So to find the first x, or the first 0, you set x plus 0 equal to 0. And you set 2x plus 5 equal to 0. I just do both kind of at the same time. To solve for x over here, I cancel out plus 0, but that doesn't really do anything. So it just means that x1 is equal to 0. The next one's a bit more difficult. I have to put a box around the 2x because the 2 is stuck to the x. So I have to cancel out this plus 5 first by doing minus 5. So I'm left with 2x equals negative 5. And at this point, because there's a multiplication between the 2 and the x, I have to divide both sides by, not 5. I have to divide both sides by 2. Okay. This means that x equals negative 5 over 2. I want you to leave your answers in fraction form, actually in reduced fraction form. So don't forget your concluding sentence. The zeros are, and I want it in coordinate form, so 0, 0, and then negative 5 over 2, comma 0. Okay, now we're going into a problem that has an equation not equal to 0. If the equation is not equal to 0, that means that you have to set it equal to 0. So which means you need to put it in standard form. So let's subtract 15 to put this in standard form. So we've got 6x squared minus x minus 15, and now we have equals 0. So remember that this is the y value equal to 0 in order to find the x-intercepts. So here we're going to find a common factor, which there isn't one. So we're going to start factoring using AC times B. So my A is 6, and my C is negative 15. And when you multiply those two things, you will get negative 90. My B value is negative 1. It's not 0. Remember that this is an invisible 1 over here. Okay. So the factors of 90, well, you've got 1 times 90. You've got 2 times 45. We've got 3 times 30. Oops, not 3 times 10. 3 times 30. 4 doesn't work. 5 times 18. Okay, we're getting closer. 90 divided by 6 is 6 times 15. 7 doesn't work. 8 doesn't work. And we get to 9 times 10, and it loops back around 10 times 9. So I'm looking around at all these factors, and I see the one that works right away, 9 times 10. But 9 times 10 is positive 90, and I have to manipulate these numbers to get negative 1, which means that it's going to be 9 minus 10. Okay. If I put a negative with the 10, that means that now 9 times negative 10 does give me negative 1. 9 times negative 10 does give me negative 90. So my two numbers are negative 10 and 9. So at this point, I have to decide if I'm going to do decomposition or not. So I take a look at my A value, and I see that my A value is 6, which means I need to do decomposition. So I'm going to go ahead and decompose that middle term. So I'm just going to change the color of that just so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, just bear with me. And I'm going to decompose that negative 1x to be negative 10x plus 9x. It's the same number. If I add up negative 10 and positive 9, I will get negative 1. So I'm just changing the format. I'm not changing anything else other than the format. This part still equals this part. I just made it a bit longer. Okay? So at this point, you need to find a common factor for the first two terms. my common factor here, between 6 and 10, the highest common factor would be 2x. With doing the two last terms, my greatest common factor, I believe, would be 3 here. Okay, so the common factor here would be 3. So do this part very slowly because you can make mistakes quite easily. I'm going to put the 2x in the front. 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x times negative 5 is negative 10x. I'm going to take the positive 3 out. Don't forget the plus. Okay, don't write just a 3 there. It looks funny. And also, it looks like it's going to be multiplied. So 3 times 3x is 9x, and 3 times negative 5, don't forget the equals 0. So I know I did this right because these two brackets match. So I write it down once, and then I write down what's left over. Make sure you write it down properly. On the test, a lot of you guys just miscopied this. So this is just factoring. We didn't solve for anything yet. At this point, you want to take 3x minus 5, set it equal to 0, and you want to take 2x plus 3 and set it equal to 0. I'm going to solve for x, but the 3 is attached, which means I need to add 5 on both sides, and then I need to divide by 3. So my first x, x1, equals 5 divided by 3. Do the same thing over here. Subtract 3 on each side. So I've got 2x equals negative 3. Since there's a multiplication between the 2 and the x, we're going to divide by 2. It means that x2 is equal to negative 3 over 2. You're going to leave it in fraction form and give me a concluding sentence. So the zeros are, don't forget to put it in coordinate form, okay, and negative 3 over 2, comma 1. This is how I want this work. So these are 3 examples of what could happen. If there's anything else that happens, we can take it up in class tomorrow when I'm back in regular class. But there's an example of decomposition, an example of common factoring, and an example of factoring without decomposition. Okay? So if you want to rewind this video, try it again. That is entirely up to you. So this is an example here, example 2, of a word problem. The thing I would take out right away is the equation. Rewrite the equation right away. Okay, so here's an equation that is given. And they're talking about a ravine where x is the distance in meters and y is the height in meters. So a ravine is just kind of like a hole with water, really. Okay, that's what that looks like. And what you need to do here is you need to find how far the stone travels horizontally before it hits the water. When you see the word horizontally, that means that you're finding x. Okay? That's your key word right there in order to find what to do here. So horizontally means x, and you need to find it. So we just did 3 examples of that. In this case here, I noticed that it's a trinomial, but it's a trinomial that has a negative in front. So I'm going to factor out that negative. Okay? Just take out a common factor of negative 1. So here's the negative 1 that's taken out. So that makes my x squared positive. It changes the 5x into a negative. It changes the 84 into a negative as well. All right, so now we have to factor this part right here. Okay, so I know that this is a trinomial, which means I'm going to use AC and B. My A is 1, and I'm going to try to find factors of negative 84, because 1 times negative 84 is 84. I need this all to add up to negative 5. So 84 divided by 1 works. 84 divided by 2 is 42, so 2 times 42 works. 3 times 28 works. 84 divided by 4, 4 times 21 works. 84 divided by 5 is not going to work. 84 divided by 6 works. 84 divided by 7 works. There are a lot of factors here. 84 divided by 8 does not work. Divided by 9 doesn't work. 10 doesn't work. I'm assuming 11 doesn't work. And then we're back at 12. Okay, so we loop back around. So one of these factors has to work. Now I can see it. I know that it's 7 and 12 because 7 minus 12 gives me negative 5. So I know that this is going to work by putting the negative in front of the 12. So now I have to decide if I'm going to use decomposition or not. If I take a look inside, I know that A is equal to 1, so I don't have to use decomposition. But be careful, make sure that you drop this 1 down. You can't forget to drop the negative. If you forget that negative, it changes the whole problem. Okay, so at this point, we're going to have x plus 7, because one of my numbers is